Hello, and welcome to 100% Real with Ruby. Today, I have the Tom back. We come at you with anti-wellness wank3ry, and this one is kind of stopping us sabotaging ourselves because when it comes to our physique goals, most of the time, what we've been fed, what we've been taught is ways to get there that get a before and after photo really fast because that's what sells, that's what gets money. And it's also stuff that just makes us feel good because we're seeing progress pretty quickly along the way. And you know what? You actually do, especially at first. That's what newbie gains are. Like, we get caught up in the hype, in the dopamine of seeing our body change or seeing or feeling differently from introducing new things, from changing things up. But that wears off over time. And if we aren't setting goals the right way, if our intentions aren't aligned, and if we don't even know how to get there in a way that has an after, a forever after, then we're going to keep ourselves in that same spiral. And most of the time, because things work, no matter what it is that you do, even if it's the most ridiculous approach ever, it's going to work when you're new to any kind of stimulus. And that's why it is so easy to go back to when things stop working, when you feel uncomfortable with your body. So with that, I'm going to let Tom kind of introduce this whole concept with that, because goals aren't just about setting goals. We need to actually bring in some reflection on why haven't your goal setting intentions got you to where you wanted to be or where you want to be in the past.
Yeah, so I think one useful way to think about the goal setting process is you're setting up a North Star. You're taking an opportunity to sit there and reflect not just on what you'd like to have, but on what has got you to the point that you're at just now. Because quite often when I work with a new person, everyone wants the same thing, right? As a coach, you'll ask people, what are your goals? And everyone wants to build a bit of muscle and lose a bit of fat. That is what broadly this industry is built upon. And I work with a lot of people who want to do strength competitions. And even there, the goal is, I want to build a bit of muscle, I want to lose a bit of fat. Until you're working with like athletes, that is going to be the standard goal. And so that answer isn't necessarily as interesting to me as, okay, what does that actually look like? Like, what is the endpoint that we're aiming for here? In most instances, what I'll find is that the goals people have contain a lot more muscle than they would think. And so why this goal setting process is so useful is because it allows us to therefore think like, right, okay, if that's the outcome that you want, what is necessary to get there? Because if it was going to be easy to get there, if the way that you needed to get to your goal was simply that you needed to adopt a calorie deficit and maintain that for 12 weeks, as you'll see in all of these 12-week transformations, then everyone would be there already, right? If your goal involves building a lot of muscle, that has to be the priority. And the reason that that is so important is because there are going to be times during that process where you will feel uncomfortable. And knowing that that process, as uncomfortable as it is going to lead to the outcome that you want, enables you to push through that discomfort. An analogy would be, if you wanted to climb a mountain, if your goal was to stand on top of a mountain, you're going to have to put up with quite a few periods of time when your legs are tired and you're climbing something that's difficult. But that climbing something that's difficult and that leg tiredness is worth it because of the outcome that you're going to get at the end. If you're looking to build muscle, there are going to be times when your clothes don't fit as nicely as you want them. There are going to be times when you don't look quote unquote beach ready. There are going to be times when maybe your physique looks a little bit worse. And that's because you end up in this really uncomfortable halfway point where you haven't built loads of muscle yet, but also you're not lean anymore. And so it needs to be a little bit uncomfortable. And I'm not saying that everybody has to bulk. I'm not saying that everybody has to gain a bunch of body fat. I think the listeners are intelligent enough to know that. But what I am saying is, if your goal is a specific outcome, in most instances, you're not going to look like that outcome until you get there. And so you have to set some intentions and you have to set yourself on a path that you know is going to lead to where you want to be. And that'll help you to put up with the discomfort along the way. I mean, Ruby, when you're working with someone, let's say someone comes to you and they're like, right, I want to build some muscle and I want to lose some fat. In my experience, those people will want to change a lot of things all at once. Say I came to you and I says, right, I want to build some muscle and lose some fat. What would be the things that you would ask me? Like, how would you approach that in such a way that we could create the path that we need to go on?
I think when many people have the whole idea of building muscle and losing fat, there has been like this whole push for body recomposition. You can do both things at once. And there's this whole eat in a slight deficit because then you'll be able to lose fat and you can still build muscle. And there's this issue where we are impatient as fuck as it is. And if we keep trying to reach both things at the same time, let's try to do a tiny little deficit, let's try to build muscle, you're going to keep yourself in a tailspin because what have you actually tried this whole time? That is probably the most fundamental piece to moving forward, because we can't just say, let's go to Puerto Rico. I don't know why the freaking hell I said Puerto Rico out of everywhere, but let's go to Puerto Rico. I can't give you directions to Puerto Rico if I don't know where the hell you are now. And if you don't know where you are now, a lot of the time we just set these arbitrary outcomes. We just check all these boxes. We knew where we were starting, but along the way we got lost in the process. And that's why we end up trying to ask for a coach or asking for help somewhere, because it's like, I don't know what to do. Then on the other hand, I have some clients who know very well what to do, but there's something that is stopping them from moving forward. Trying to keep forcing that without figuring out why it is you are stuck. Most of the time, it's because we hold ourselves to the same metrics that are used for fat loss to build muscle. It is really difficult to try to chase two different things at once. So how do I build muscle and lose fat? Well, let's actually just develop a baseline first, because it doesn't make sense to try to give you some target to move forwards when you don't have anything sustainable yet. I don't know where I heard it from, but we want to stabilize before we try to optimize. And it's very difficult to make changes to something that you aren't very consistent with yet. And if you are consistent with that thing and you're still not getting the changes you want, very rarely is the answer, let's add more or cut more food, because most of the time that has been your default approach. And it's ridiculous that fat loss is always the default these days. Everyone's shredding for summer. That is the only thing that people look forward to these days. Like muscle, shape. That's the thing that most women are wanting. They want to look tighter. We've already pushed the diet lever, the diet button for all these years already. What's the thing that we haven't actually pushed? The training. So the main thing that I go all into is the training, because that is 10 out of 10 times, the thing that is missing.
Yeah. So
and it's not
when you say they need to stabilize, then what does that look like? Like what is it? What does it look like when a person is stable? What does it look like when a person's ready to optimize? Like, what are you trying to get people to?
I like this, because this is something that I know that you do really well as well. But we need to figure out, what does your training look like? What do your lifts look like? What is your program like? Because if you're doing 5 days a week and you're not seeing change, we need to look at how you are actually training. What is the effort that you're putting in? Do you do your warm-up sets before you actually do your working sets? Because otherwise you probably get about 5 effective sets out of your whole session, because most of them were just ramping you up to a working weight. But then most of the time it's a nutrition thing. Like, are you eating enough protein through the day? Are you eating enough veggies through the day? Do you have any consistency in your day-to-day routine? Because if we don't have some consistent basis to go off with that, or if you're only aware of your food on the weekdays and then on the weekends you don't even know what happens, we need to get some form of stable meals of eating. Let's figure out, what is it you're eating in a day? Let's track it. Let's take photos of it. Let's put it into MyFitnessPal. Let's see where your baseline is at. And most of the time, there is something that pops up in that process where it's not even a numerical issue. It's, I didn't realize that I was having all these nibbles before, or I didn't realize how little protein I was having. So It's basically that. How would you usually stabilize someone? Because this is the biggest part, but we also need to figure out what was holding him back. So how would you approach that in a sense of knowing that we also want to direct ourselves forward? We need to get you looking forward to something.
Yeah, so the first thing that I'll do with folk is, it's good to establish an outcome that we're chasing, because, as I say, that allows you to get through the suck. So it's like, right, what are we gunning towards? Cool, right? So whatever that goal is, whether you're wanting to lose fat, whether you're wanting to build muscle, whether you want to smash a marathon, whether you're wanting to climb the biggest mountain, whether you want to compete in the Olympic Games, whatever goal that is going to be the result of intentional choices that you make over an extended period of time. And when I first start working with people, people, the big problem that a lot of them have is that many of their choices are made unconsciously, or many of their choices are made reactively in accordance to whatever's going on. So I'll work with someone and they eat really well during the week, and then the weekend goes to shit because they're out of routine. Or they'll eat really well until they've had a hard day at work, and then their eating goes to shit. Something like that. And so the first thing that I like to establish is exactly as you said, intentional food choices where you're eating regular meals at regular times, ensuring you're eating enough vegetables, ensuring you're eating enough protein. I also like to help people, or ask people to help themselves, to work on a little bit of resilience, because there is never going to be a consistently easy 6 to 12 months of life. That is not going to happen. For the next whatever time period is required for you to achieve the goal that you want to achieve, something's going to go wrong. You're going to have a hard week at work. Your kid's going to be a knobhead. There's going to be something that goes on that makes things a bit more difficult. And so you need the resilience to be able to deal with that without resorting to rotting in bed instead of going to the gym, without resorting to eating as many biscuits as you physically can in a short space of time. Like, there has to be something there. So I like to work a lot with people on some degree of regulation, on some degree of self-checking, on some degree of taking time to reflect, regulate yourself. And I also encourage people to get like a hobby. You cannot be a person that just gets up and does stuff that's necessary in the house and then goes to the gym and then comes back and then goes to work and then gets ready to do it again tomorrow. That is not a life. That is not sustainable. That is not going to put you in a position mentally, emotionally, or from a nervous system perspective to be able to take these conscious decisions. So we spend however long it takes to get there. And sometimes that can take 3 to 6 months, because some people have really difficult lives. Some people are very dysregulated. Some people are very disorganized.
Wait. You just said something important. You said 3 to 6 months. Can we emphasize this part as well? Because, like, 3 to 6 months, I needed to highlight that.
What will often happen is that during those 3 to 6 months, as you're getting better regulated, as you're getting better routine, as your nutrition's improving at the absolute baseline, you start making meaningful steps towards whatever outcome that you want. An analogy that I will make sometimes is that if your goal was to cross a lake and I gave you nothing but some pitch tar and an axe, you're going to spend a lot of that time building a raft, and it'll feel like you're not progressing across the lake, because it's like, I haven't even started to cross the lake yet, but you're building the boat. That is a part of progression. And so to get yourself into a position where you're going to have the stereotypical beach body or whatever, there may be a large amount of time where it doesn't feel like you're working towards that. It doesn't feel like your body's changing, because what is changing is your ability to get your shit together. And sometimes that takes a while. If your shit is very much not together, it can take a while to collect it all. But you should set your expectations such that you recognize that these improvements are happening. And this is one reason why I like people to take time to reflect. It's one reason why I like people to take time to actually think about things, and yes, journal and stuff like that, because it's really difficult to recognize the amount of important progression you're making when you go from having your food all over the place to planning it. It's really difficult to recognize the importance of things like 3 or 4 weeks ago when I had a really bad day at work, I came back and ordered a takeaway. And now when I had a really bad day at work, I came back and I had a herbal tea and I went for a walk, and then I had like a healthy meal from the air fryer that tasted really nice and was a little bit junky but was actually a better choice. Like, that is a big step forward. That is a really meaningful thing. And if you're not taking the time to think about this shit, you don't recognize that for the meaningfulness that it has. And so what happens is you feel like you're not progressing towards your goals, even though you very literally are. So once someone's got all of that down, that's when we can start looking at the big rocks. Like, okay, now do we need to start dropping fat or whatever? But as I say, alongside that, and exactly as you said, a big component of basically any goal that you set is going to be high quality, intense training. Going to the gym is fine if your goal is to be healthy and fit. If you want to build muscle, if you want to change your body composition, if you want to hit athletic goals, there are going to be times when you'll go to the gym when you can't be bothered, because that has to be the case. You're not going to be excited to go to the gym all the time. And there are going to be times when you unrack a barbell or you sit down in a machine and you're like, shit, this is going to be really difficult. This is going to be really hard. Like, I don't know if I'm going to be capable of doing this. And the goal that you set has to be valuable enough, and you have to reflect on it well enough such that you're going to do that anyway. I mean, Ruby, when you're working with people and they're coming to you and you're like, oh God, training was really difficult. Like how do you talk people around that? Like, what would you want to say to somebody if they came to you and they said, I don't know if I'm going to be able to train this hard. Like, I don't know if I'm going to be capable of this. Like, how would you talk them around that?
I think this ties into exactly what I wanted to lead into, where we have this expectation of what things should look like. And that is the first thing that is going to set you back. And this is why I started this whole conversation with goal setting doesn't start with setting goals itself. It starts with figuring out the things that are holding you back, because you've made progress before, but something has always got in the way. These shoulds, these expectations. And most of it is from what we think it should look like. So we think that we should already be able to nail a squat or be able to just load something on the bar. But you didn't just become, like, doctors don't just become doctors. They start off not knowing a thing until they do their first class. You're not exempt from the learning process. The biggest cause of you never reaching your goals is shame. Shame because you feel like you should already have your shit together. Shame because you're struggling. Shame because you think you're the only one who is quote unquote faulty. You're not faulty, you're human. And there is no, like, there's just because you're struggling to figure out food and you think that you should be able to just manage it already. How? Who the hell taught you when you were a child? Most of the time, what you were modeled was not helpful. It was very much diet culture. And if it wasn't diet culture, unless your parents understood all of this stuff, which most of the time they wouldn't back then, how can you expect yourself to just gain master habits off the bat? If you don't allow yourself to take the time to go one step at a time, you're going to keep falling back to the same baseline level. Instead of trying to achieve all the time, why don't we just try to raise the floor? Because that usually is the biggest setback. It's not what you do on your good days when you're motivated. It's what you do the majority of the time, because that's life. And I have this client that continually, thinks that she's the only one that experiences this. And then I have another client who is the exact same, who thinks that she's the only one who experiences this. So I find it funny that it's like, you're not the only ones experiencing this. And I bet that I can say that every single client has their own thing that they think they're the only ones experiencing. But the main part of this, which ties it all together, is random off-plan things, or this coming up, you getting sick. I know that we spoke about it in a different podcast where we were talking about injuries. Real good podcast that Tom and I did. It's not the rarity. It is the majority. Life is always going to happen. You're always going to be stressed out. You said something there as well, Tom. There was the thing where you mentioned building the raft. Have you heard of that axe analogy where it's like, do you want to keep trying to whack a tree with a blunt axe, or do you want to take the however many hours to sharpen the axe and just get it over and done with? Like, would you rather just work hard or work effectively? And I think this ties into the whole training thing as well. We start off with this particular thing in mind. They start realizing that there's actually something on the other side where you can enjoy food, where it's not all about scales and progress photos. You're allowed to allow your goals to pivot with you. And if we don't accept that and realize, hey, there are some greater things out there, or hold ourselves to, oh my God, what if I let myself go? We're going to stay stuck in that same cycle. So how can we actually get these all-encompassing goals that can excite us forward? You're going to start off at a baseline level, yes. You're not going to be great, yes. Squats, deadlifts, bench, they're complex movements, but they're freaking empowering. But they are skills that you learn, and over time you get better at them. And you might unlock a huge 5 kilo PB just from a slight technique change. But you also need to be in the know of what what progress in real life looks like, because it's not always PRs every week, and it can't be that every week, because that just means your training's ineffective. You just went too soft to start with, and what were you doing those weeks? Explain that.
A good way to look at this is that when you first start training, you're going to progress really, really quickly. If you've never been to the gym before, if I show you a picture of a barbell, you're going to get stronger by just conceptualizing weight in space. However, once you've been training for like 3 to 6 months, if you've been training with intensity, some people this can be for years if they don't train with any particular plan. But once you've been training for a little while and your body's made all of the normal neurological changes that it's going to make as a complete beginner, and once you've got up to a basic level of strength, that progression is going to slow right down. And so, as I said, the best way that I think to think of this is if you add 2.5 kilos to the bar every week for a year, you've added 130 kilos to the bar. So if you're going to expect yourself to be able to add 2.5 kilos to the bar every week, you are going to be very disappointed, because what that would mean is after 3 years, you've added nearly 400 kilos to the bar. And I don't know about any of you, but I'm probably never going to squat 420 kilos. So even if you start with just the barbell, that kind of progression is not going to happen that quickly. And so why it's really important for us to set a goal that excites us and understand that this means that sometimes you're going to go through the suck is because there are going to be lots of times throughout your training career, it is going to be the majority of your training career, the vast majority of your training career, you are not going to feel like you're making progress week to week. That is just how that works. If you feel like you're adding weight every single week, either you're a complete beginner, you're on steroids, or your technique is getting worse, because it just doesn't work like that. Or you keep chopping and changing exercises. Like if you go from doing lat pull downs to machine rows, you'll all of a sudden make new progress until you get used to machine rows. And then if you change the exercise again, you'll always feel like you're making progress. You're just not getting stronger. You're just getting better at new exercises. I think what you're saying about like it's really important to understand what this really looks like. This is where I think a lot of social media marketing does people a lot of disservice, because there are two kinds of social media marketing that are really common that I think are quite damaging. The first one is the everyone knows this, the big before and after photos, where someone takes a photo and it's like, look at my 12-month, they take a photo and it's like, look at my 12-week transformation, and they look incredible from week 1 to week 12. That is bullshit, because most of the time that is either going to be just a lie. Remember, people can lie on the internet. Like, God, these days it might be an AI image. Or it's actually going to be like a 6-year transformation. And all that's happened is that person spent 6 years building muscle. And yes, once you build a bit of muscle, as I've said at the start of the podcast, you might end up looking a little bit softer. I am not as low body fat now as I would like to be ultimately. But what that means is, at the start of this transformation, they've already taken the time to build the muscle. They've already taken the time to build the shape. They've taken the time to get good at the exercise. And then to just do a 12-week diet, because this, like, it's not hard to do that, right? Losing fat is a lot easier than building muscle. Losing fat is a lot faster than building muscle. So that's the first kind. And I think that does people a disservice, because if you're not showing the before, and you're not showing the after, a before and after is functionally meaningless. Because if you want to get those results, you need to do the work to get there in the first place. So that's the first thing.
And most people don't show that.
No, of course not. Like there's a really good, God, I wish I could remember what he's called. It's Darren something. Shout out to Darren something on Instagram. But he posts really good transformations from people at his gym. And it's like, oh, look, here's a 3-year transformation. Like, that's really cool. And that's really good. The other kind of social media marketing that pisses me off, and I think does people a significant disservice, and I don't want to be misogynistic, but it's always female creators that post this kind of content. Always. It is the content that is especially like booty content. Or like, this is how I built my back or whatever. And they show bullshit exercises or good exercises done to like 8 reps in reserve. And the reason they do that is because when you train hard, you gurn, you pull awful faces, you get really sweaty, and it doesn't look good. And so the content that's going to do really well on Instagram is a person doing a hip thrust that is well within their training capacity. It's a person doing a squat that's easy. It's a person that's doing little booty band exercises or glute dominant cable exercises with fairly low intensity. And the problem I have with this is that this creates an image that this is what training looks like. And so if my training looks like this, then I'm going to get the same outcome. Whereas actually, Ruby, something that I think you do really well is you show the intensity that you train with. Like, you show how hard you actually have to train in order to get the results that people want. And it is really uncomfortable. And I think it takes some exposure to that. And going back to like the baseline thing, one of the hardest things you need to learn is you need to learn how to train hard, because you can feel like you're training hard because you push yourself and you get the burn. But what you'll find is when you're doing something like a leg press, your quads will start burning and it's really uncomfortable, and you'll be 8 reps from failure. You need to do 6 more reps in order to get quite close to failure, and that's where muscle is built. You also need to learn to coordinate your muscle contractions, and you need to learn to brace. And the coordinating muscle contractions thing, that just happens with practice. That's not a conscious thing that you learn to do yourself over time. You just need to get better and better at pushing closer and closer to failure. You need to get good at bracing so that you can push through the difficult part of a rep without going, oh no, I can't do that. And none of us are born with these skills. Like, this is not like when I'm saying you need to learn to do that, that's not me being like condescending. Like, you need to learn to do that. Like, it's hard to train hard. And if you've never been taught to do that, and you've been told by Instagram fitness that what hard training looks like is you have perfect hair and perfect makeup and you're not sweaty and you're wearing matching gym kit and you get a few reps in and then you pose for a pump in the mirror, then you've been lied to. And I think that is really damaging. Just before I finish, someone that I will give a shout out to, a fellow Australian, but she goes by Train Ugly Fitness on Instagram. So train _ugly _fitness. Lazy boy, spelled BOI. She trains like an absolute demon, and I think she's really good at illustrating what hard training looks like, just like Ruby is. And I think if you can, like, it's one reason why I encourage people to follow powerlifters, because powerlifters, by and large, have great physiques.
And it's funny because I don't see any of them doing cable fucking kickback.
No, and there's nothing wrong with a cable kickback, but if you're going to do a cable kickback, do it within 1 or 2 reps of failure, because just doing it until you get a pump or doing it until you get a burn, that's not going to build muscle. I mean, Ruby, do you have anything to add to that?
Because you just said a bit, so I'm going to try to condense it.
Sure.
But there was something that you said about the skill of training hard, and that just reminds me of one of my ladies. When I started to realize that she was only starting to really push some of her numbers up towards the 8th week of her program, and I used to give her 8 to 10 weeks of a program because I extended it 2 weeks each time because it was on that 8th week that I saw the numbers tick up. And I'm like, you know what? For a while, she's been with me since 2017. So I'm like, you know what? We're going to do 16-week programs, because it's not until week bloody 8 that you start to actually take your lifts seriously and train with intensity. And it was since then that her body really started to change. She has never had glutes that she has now or legs that she has now, because she has learned to train to failure. And the thing is, exactly like Tom said, if you're always changing your programming, always changing your exercises, how are you expecting to build up a ability or the skill to train to failure? Like something with the leg extensions for me, I am someone who also struggles with pushing into discomfort on the leg extensions. Even Tom called me out on this. Mm-hmm. And that's why when it comes to leg extensions, it's something that I would normally aim to at least increase 1 rep out of all of my sets. Just 1 rep. You don't have to increase 1 rep on every single set. Just challenge yourself to increase 1 rep on 1 set. And if that still feels easy, then I would say increase the weight. And that is something I usually say as well, increase the weight on the 3rd exercise. But then something else that you mentioned there, people think that they're just meant to look leaner once they start building muscle, because muscle's lean. Muscle makes you look tighter. Yeah, it does. In the whole mathematical equation by the end, once you've built sufficient muscle. And the thing that I really liked about the reel that I shared you about, yeah, it did gain some body fat. The thing is, when you're starting to eat more, you're going to feel more fluffy because you finally have a hydrated body. You finally have carbs. Carbohydrate. You're hydrated, but also you're training harder. That's going to fill up with muscle glycogen too. But if you are starting to push into the higher range of maintenance, into a slight surplus to build, that is going to get you a leaner physique long term. But in the meantime, we need to appreciate the fact that you're not going to get the abs, the tightness that you want if you keep avoiding that discomfort, because it's just making you fluffy.
Yeah,
because
it's a process, right? You've got to build the muscle and then you've got to lose the fat that covers it. And if you don't do the first step, then you just keep doing the losing fat. It's like, well, there's nothing, like, it just doesn't work like that. I also think something that you've pulled out that I want you to expand on now, because you talk about this often. You talk about lean legs and people wanting to have lean legs and people wanting to have like tight legs. What I think is probably useful for people to recognize is when you have lean legs, they're still not rock hard, right?
I was going to ask you about this, Tom. Mm-hmm. My chubby, I'm just going to say, my chubby little inner thighs keep rubbing each other now when I'm running, and it's really freaking annoying. And I think that fits really perfectly into this conversation, because muscle still jiggles. Muscle, like, I remember when I would put my legs down on a bench and I would just beat myself up over the fact that they're these tree trunks. And this was back in high school days. Like, I hated my legs more than anything. I would cover them up. I would never wear shorts. If I wore shorts, I would cover them up with something. I would only wear skirts. I hated my legs. And this is something that carries on into the now, where you're trying to build muscle. And you can't expect to build leanness if you're going to avoid you can't dispute the fact that you're going to have to upsize your pants at some point because they don't make clothes. The majority, go into a shopping mall. The majority of people do not lift. They don't make clothes for you. Those pants are not made for you. Your quads are not going to fit in normal people pants. If you keep trying to tie yourself to those pants, then stop asking for lean legs, because lean legs are muscle. And the only reason mine look leaner and stay leaner, even with a higher body fat percentage, because even when I was a higher body fat percentage, I still had lines in my legs. Why? Because I had that much more muscle mass. You can look leaner at a higher body weight, a higher body fat percentage, if you've built that muscle. And what built my legs was powerlifting. What built my legs was a lot of strength training with intensity. It wasn't like Pilates and doing light resistance circuit stuff. It was actually training with intensity. It wasn't dieting. You can diet all you want, but you're not going to build the muscle, because training with that intensity, this is probably something really good for you to touch on to tie it off once I finish this bit, because I want to talk about something else you said. But training with that intensity and being able to progress that over time. Tom, make sure you bring in what you said to me about you need to eat for strength. And if you want to actually feel like you're progressing, then you're going to have to eat. I want you to bring that up here for the people listening to this, because if you feel like you're not making progress and you can't see it anywhere, Tom's got an answer for you, which he'll mention after this. But you need to fuel that progress. You need to be able to fuel yourself to perform. Performance is what drives physique. But back to the whole, because you mentioned this, and I think it's important. We want to set goals that excite us. And I'm human. This is something that plagues me all the time, which is why I've been very indecisive with my goals, talking about pull-ups, because pull-ups, as much as I wanted to have like gnarly weighted pull-ups and making them look beastly, every single time I go do them, I hate them, because I always feel like I'm getting worse. I feel like I'm weaker. And the thing is, pull-ups are really freaking hard. If you're expecting it to be easy to get to some outcome, like you mentioned at the start, if you're expecting it to be a smooth road, to not have ups and downs in progress, to be able to just progress linearly there, you're gonna let yourself down the moment it gets hard, the moment you come up against resistance. And the same with my deadlifts. I had to regress my deadlifts because I overshot them. But then in regressing them to bring them up again, that is what builds the base. And that's something to bring in mind here as well. You don't get stronger at something or better at something by continuing to hammer it. There are other things underneath. But what I wanted to quickly tie my bow on so you can finalize with yours. If you're expecting to create the most wonderful garden and you plant the seeds and then you start watering the seeds because you have this initial motivation, you just set the goal. I can just imagine it playing there, and I'm going to have some pink flowers here. You have every like amazing intention, and you show up, you water, you show up, you water. But then as soon as you don't see the changes anymore, you're not seeing anything happen, you get disheartened. You're not seeing anything there. So then you stop watering them. What do? Say that the seeds didn't work? Or is it the fact that you expected to see the changes really soon? Because that's what muscle building is. If you want to go into a fat loss phase, you wouldn't even be considering seeds. You would go get artificial plants and plant them right there, because you would see changes like that. And if you're not seeing fat loss changes within 3 to 4 months, 3 months, I would say, then you're not in a calorie deficit and your process isn't working, because fat loss is fast. Muscle building is really slow. And that's why you don't start a fat loss phase in fat loss, because that hasn't worked for you. You need to figure out and stabilize where you are now, figure out what has held you back before, troubleshoot that, and then get into it. But just to tie the bow on something I mentioned at the beginning, so then you can finish it off. Don't go doing the whole build muscle, lose fat at the same time, because you have the opportunity to be eating around 2,000 calories. The majority of women will be around 1,800 to 2,400, around there. But if you're going to try and do a little tiny little deficit and hardly really lose weight, you're going to be struggling to live in today's modern environment, wanting to socialize. Any little thing that you have over is going to take you out of a deficit. So you're just eating little calories for nothing, not seeing any fat loss, but you're not really eating enough to perform and fuel yourself properly, especially if you haven't learned how to do that. So technically you're doing nothing. That is why I'm so adamant on that part. So now tie it off with you.
Yeah, trying to pick up a thread from that. So, I mean,
There's 3 threads. Take them all.
One thing that you did mention was that you're not going to build muscle from doing lots of circuits and stuff. You need to train with intensity. I think it's important to define what intensity is, because doing circuits and things like that is really difficult. Like circuit training is really hard. And you are training with intensity, but there's different kinds of intensity. So there's anaerobic intensity, like what you get in circuits, where you're completely out of breath and you feel absolutely exhausted. Like, that is intense. But the intensity that we need is the ability to push your muscles close to failure. Now, what failure is when no matter how hard you push, your muscle can't lift the weight anymore. And that's what takes time, and that's what you have to learn how to do. And it's a very different kind of intensity, and it can feel very uncomfortable until you get better at it. So that's something that I think people who are coming to this from like a circuit training background, it's something that you need to think about, because you will not get that "I'm completely out of breath, I'm absolutely destroyed" feeling from a good lifting session. What you'll get instead is the feeling of momentary failure a few times, where you really have to dig in deep and scrunch your face up and push really hard through a rep. But then 2 minutes later, you're not out of breath, because that's not how lifting works. Maybe on like a back squat, obviously. You know what I mean? Something else that you said, which I think is like if you're going to build muscle, you're not going to fit into clothes. I think that ties into what you were saying at the end there, which is that, yes, what you can do and what society tells you to do, especially if you're a woman, is if you're not happy with your body, what you need to do is you need to eat less. And you need to make yourself smaller, and you need to make sure that you fit into the smallest clothes, and you need to make sure that you're less and less and less and less. And that can work for some people. And there are some people out there who, at the end, their legs will never rub together, and they will fit into in the UK, it'll be like a size 6 to 8. I don't know what the sizing works like in Australia. Like over here, our size 4 is a size 0 in the US. Our sizing's weird. But yeah, like some people will end up very, very small. Some people have a very slight bone structure. Some people are quite naturally of having a relatively low appetite. And that's fine. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like I've worked with a few women who, at the end of everything, they're like 45 kilos, and they're light and they're healthy and they're fast on their feet and they're happy, and that's fine. But that's not everyone, right? Like, I'm never going to be 6'5". It is what it is.
I think people always miss the height when it comes to that stuff. They just see your weight.
Yeah, but in addition, like, there are men who are my height who look great at like 70 kilos. And they're really lean, and they're slight, and they do lots of running, and they're happy with that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But that's not my bone structure. I have relatively wide hips, and I have a relatively short torso. There's nothing I can do about that. And I think if you look online and you are consistently met with the idea that, if your legs rub together, that's really bad and you need to fit into really small clothes and blah, blah, blah. If that's not your bone structure, that is a goal that you're going to keep chasing, and you're going to keep eating 1,300 calories, and you're going to keep trying to make yourself smaller, and it's never going to work, and you're going to feel really sad about it, because, as Ruby said, lean legs do not feel like wood. Lean legs are still soft. Lean arm is still soft. Lean stomach, for the most part, is still soft, unless you've just woke up in the morning. Anyone that you see who's got a completely flat stomach, that flat stomach goes away after they've eaten something, unless they are doing a lot of stuff right and are quite a long way along their training journey. Like, that takes a long time to get to.
Training journey of training intensely, which is why the training is so freaking important here, because you're not dieting that shit on.
No, you're not dieting to that point. Like, that person has very, very well developed abdominals. They have a very well developed lower back, which keeps their stomach looking tight, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, so the choice that a lot of women are often faced with is eat like shit or eat to get smaller. And I think what you said, where like most women are going to benefit from eating 1,800 to 2,400 calories and building a bit of muscle, is true. The best physique that you can have is different to the best physique that someone else can have, dependent on bone structure, genetics, and so on. And if you're consistently ignoring that, you're going to be consistently disappointed. In the same way as if you have African hair and you take care of it like a Caucasian person, your hair is going to look like shit, even if you're doing everything right, because you're not adapting the approach that you need to make to the genetics that you have. And so the best body that you can build with the leanest legs and the most everything blah, blah, blah is probably heavier than you think it is. And that means that you need to let go of this societally driven expectation of having a thigh gap, of being a waif, because most women can't do that. Most women could do that, but you'd be hungry forever and never have any energy, and you're going to feel like shit, and you're going to eat so little that you're going to end up with hollow bones and no muscle mass by the time you're 65. You're going to fall over, break a hip, and die. And that's
This
not where
goes
we
to
want
what we said with the more muscle you build, the leaner you look at
to.
a lower body fat percentage, but that shit takes time.
Yeah, like someone who I think is an incredibly good.
And it's difficult while you're looking for that. It's difficult to imagine progress or to even find ways that you're progressing if
Mm,
you only look to the things that you've been taught to look for, or you only look at the surface level things, like what does your physique look like? Which is why when I set my goals for Tom, I'm like, I want glutes and I want delts. So what am I going to prioritize? I want a Bulgarian split squat that is heavier than my body weight for 6 to 8 reps. Because if you're strong at a Bulgarian split squat, you can bet your ass that your ass is gonna grow. Same with your RDLs. So instead of setting physique goals that you're going to measure by what you see in the mirror, which is never gonna happen because you see yourself on a daily basis, that's not gonna, like, you won't see the changes. But if you can set them based on the actions that get you there, the things that can excite you, I still want you to tie up with that because I think it's so important. Then you can start to have that forward progress. And also, you can't expect to see that progress if you're continually underfueling yourself.
yeah, it's just letting go of this thing that you need to be smaller. So someone that I would definitely recommend any women to follow is someone called Shelley McCoy. She plays Saber in the latest season of Gladiators. I don't know if Gladiators is a global thing or if it's just something that's on in the UK. But Shelley, SHELI_McCoy. She's from Scotland. Like I've known her for years, but she looks incredibly feminine. Like she's not someone that you look like, oh, you look really bulky, like you look really masculine. She's a very feminine looking woman. She's not tall, and she's like, I think the last time I spoke, I think she was in like the low 70s, low 70 kilos, because she's got massive quads and big glutes and strong shoulders and big arms, and she's a fucking gladiator, and she trains like a demon, and she's strong, and she's got that way not by eating 1,300 calories and trying to be as small as possible, but by deciding, right, my goal is to get really strong, get really athletic. So what I'm going to do is forget body composition. That's not the goal. The goal is to be like she does CrossFit. It's to be extremely good at CrossFit. I want a big front squat. I want a big clean and jerk. I want a big deadlift. I want a big back squat. I want a big bench press. I want a big overhead press. So I'm going to train and eat for those goals. And by doing that, she has built a physique that is now got her on Gladiators.
The funny thing is that it wasn't until I started eating more food and training really freaking hard that I started getting asked, do you compete? And this was for bodybuilding. Like, I never got asked that question in my life when I was dieting, when I was trying to get abs. I looked like a soft, puffy little thing because going off the genetics part, just because I think it's important for me to say this, you're probably the first person I have not yet once complained to about how much I hate my waist and I need to just lose my waist. Because my whole life, I was obsessed about changing my waist. But I had to accept the fact, actually, I will complain to you because you said something about my belt being too low. I can't get it higher because my rib cage is there. I don't have a waist. This is the point. Like, the only thing my waist is now stopping me from is not needing to pee myself because my deadlift belt is too low. But I used to want to change every part of my waist. And because I hated the fact that I felt like everything stored on my waist, that stopped me from ever allowing myself to eat more food. And because of that, I never got the hard, lean, toned look unless I was eating 1,100 calories or actually 1,000 calories in the last couple of weeks of my comp. But that was like 7 kilos ago when I was 7 kilos lighter. Whereas now I'm like maintaining a pretty solid-ish midsection, 7 kilos heavier than my stage weight. Like, that's what muscle does.
Absolutely. And that's a really good example because, I mean, you do have a waist, but the reason you don't have a really prominent waist is because you've got a relatively short torso. And there's no amount of dieting that's going to get rid of that. And so it's a case of like getting comfortable with that. And if you're listening to this podcast and you have relatively broad hips and you tend to store a lot of weight on your legs, there is no dieting that's going to get rid of that. That is your genetic makeup. So you've got two choices. Either you can try and fight against that, eat 1,000 calories a day and try and diet yourself into oblivion, feel like shit the whole way and find out it doesn't work anyway. Or you can think, right, okay, my genetic makeup is to be a little bit heavier. So why don't I maximize that? Why don't I build some muscle? Why don't I make my body look awesome and make it look feminine and make it look lean and make it look strong? But that's not going to happen at 50 kilos unless you're 3 foot tall. Like, it might happen at a little bit heavier. And the route to get there is through making yourself powerful, making yourself strong. And if the idea of being powerful and strong doesn't appeal to you because you're thinking, well, I don't want to be powerful and strong because I'm a woman, then that's something that you need to.
I loved that. I think you should really I think the message of all of this is get curious about your goals, get curious about why you want certain things, and get curious about your way there. Because chances are you're listening to this and you're in your 30s, your 40s, your 50s. You bet everything that you have tried at least one thing in your past. So figure out what it is that has held you back, because you can hire the best coach in the world and you're still never going to get there if you don't challenge your thinking and change how you see things, because you're going to keep holding yourself back. And the best coach in the world will get you to challenge your thinking, but you'll keep blocking it off because of the fears that you have. But you want to see change and you want to change your physique. You need to stop using fat loss metrics for aesthetic goals, because they are two different things. Aesthetics demand building muscle, working on performance, and it's a positive focus. Whereas fat loss, weight loss, that's more a negative thing where you're thinking of deprivation. Like, there's a place for fat loss, but we want it to be short, sharp, and efficient. Otherwise, you're just going to be trying to get by on 1,300 calories a day, never actually eating 1,300 calories a day, because my left ass cheek eats that much. I could not even get through a friggin', I could not do one day on 1,300 calories. Most of you would not be able to get through a day on 1,300 calories if you tracked your food accurately and that sort of stuff. But I'm tying it off there. I know that Tom has to jet, but I'm hoping you got a lot out of this. If you had to leave them with two things that they can focus on if they want to build this lean physique, they've been trying for years, but nothing has really worked, or it's worked and then progress just stopped and they found themselves in old patterns, what would you say to them?
Train and eat in such a way that you can build up to being able to squat 140 kilos for a single. That is a more than reasonable goal for any woman. And if you get there, then you will have stronger and leaner legs. And if you don't get there and you only get to 120, you'll still have stronger and leaner legs. But that is the kind of goal that I would recommend that you take. Even if being strong for the sake of being strong isn't a goal that you have, if you set some piss-take strength gain goals and start eating and working towards them, first of all, you're going to train in such a way that allows you to build muscle, which is going to change your physique. Secondly, you're going to eat in such a way that facilitates that, which means that you're going to sort your digestion out. It's going to mean that you're eating in such a way that you've got plenty of energy, which means that not only can you train, you're also going to be eating enough so that you've got the energy to deal with all of the stress and all of the external things that happen, things at work, things with your kids, things with your partner. You're going to be eating enough to be well fueled enough to deal with those things. And then also you're going to start noticing incremental improvements towards that outcome. And those incremental improvements towards that outcome are where motivation comes from, because it's very difficult to say that you've had a crap week when you've added 5 kilos to your back squat. And so if you're eating and training in such a way that you are going to achieve something like that, you will find a lot more progress towards the outcome that you want than if you exclusively try to eat as little as possible and train in such a way that facilitates fat loss and then step on the scales every single week and hope for the best, because that's what you've been doing this whole time and it hasn't worked. So you might as well change your approach.
I love that. Thank you guys for listening to this podcast. I hope this gave you a different way of viewing your goals and a different way of setting them. And if anything resonated with you, reach out to either Tom or me. Let me know. And please get me to 100 5-star ratings. It literally takes a second. And if you shoot me a message, I'll see if I can send anything free to you. And yeah, thank you guys for listening, and you'll hear me on the next podcast.